Hi, I'm V, and today I'm going to be diving into the top 5 unsettling military experiments hidden from the world. Number 5, Project Iceworm. During the Cold War, the United States Army aimed to build a network of underground nuclear missile launch sites under the Greenland ice sheet. The goal of this project was to build a launch site that could withstand a first strike from the opposing side of the war. The military created Camp Sentry as a cover-up to explain why they were working under the ice. The unstable conditions of the ice caused the military to cancel the project in 1966, after just 6 years. Camp Sentry was described as a demonstration of affordable ice cap military outposts, and the purpose was to test various construction techniques in Arctic conditions, to explore practical problems with a semi-nuclear reactor, and to support scientific experiments on the ice cap. This is what the US military told Danish officials when asked about what they were doing. Project Iceworm was to be a system of tunnels spanning 4,000 kilometers in length, used to deploy up to 600 nuclear missiles which could reach the Soviet Union in the event of a nuclear war. Though Project Iceworm was a secret, the cover-up, Camp Sentry, was approved by Denmark. 21 trenches with arched roofs were created and prefabricated buildings were placed within. With a length of 3 kilometers, the tunnels also contained a hospital, a shop, a theater, and a church. The population of people living in these tunnels was about 200. From 1960 to 1963, the power was supplied to these tunnels by the world's first portable nuclear reactor. The water was supplied by melting glaciers and was tested for germs and diseases before it was ingested. Within 3 years of the creation, they found that the glacier was moving faster than expected, and that the tunnels and launch stations would be destroyed in under 2 years. The tunnels were evacuated by 1965. The nuclear generator was removed as well. Project Iceworm was cancelled, and the cover-up Camp Sentry was closed in 1965. They left behind tons of waste under the ice sheet, which will eventually surface due to the melting ice caps and disrupt the surrounding environment and ecosystems. The project was declassified in the 90s, and the documentation of it went public. Number 4, Hallucinogenic Warfare. In 2019, the Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency invested $27 million into the research and development of more efficacious, fast-acting drugs. This included hallucinogens. In 1938, Albert Hofmann, a Sandoz chemist, developed LSD while working on a fungus that grew on grain. The psychoactive properties of LSD were not discovered until 1943. In the 50s, military began to test LSD's use along with electroshock, hypnosis, and others in an attempt to develop a mind control program. In the 1950s, the military partnered with pharmaceutical companies in the hopes that they would develop LSD into an effective weapon for psychological warfare. Instead of using it against enemies, the military exploited US service members and developed a hallucinogen that would leave their enemies mentally incapacitated. The psychologists working on this project raised concerns regarding the ethics of this project. Soldiers who volunteered as test subjects were not given adequate information regarding the nature of the experiment or the potential traumatic side effects that they would gain from it. The testing of LSD was concluded in 1963, not because of the ethical ramifications, but because the drug itself was too unpredictable to be effectively weaponized. Upon investigation, they found that test subjects experienced a myriad of long-lasting, extremely serious psychiatric issues. They found that the testing program was riddled with abuses of power and human rights violations. The testing that is currently occurring regarding hallucinogens is vastly different, scientifically and ethically. The shift that makes the improvement obvious is that they are being tested in the field of healthcare and not in military use. The new goal is to improve quality of life by using hallucinogens to effectively aid in the healing of trauma and brain patterns. This horrific chapter in US history serves as a cautionary tale, and it is extremely important that it is talked about. As the philosopher George Santayana said, those who cannot remember the past are bound to repeat it. Reminding testing facilities of the past mistakes and failings of ethical codes to remember why they're conducting this testing. To help and to heal, not to hinder. Number 3, Project 112. Project 112, or 112, was a biological and chemical experiment run by the United States Department of Defense from 1962 to 1973. Canada and the United Kingdom also participated in aspects of Project 112. The purpose of the project was to create biological and chemical agents that were capable of temporarily incapacitating enemies in a controlled way. The program was conducted on extracontinental sites in the Pacific as well as Alaska. At least 50 trials were conducted. In this, at least 18 of these tests included simulants of biological agents, such as BG, which is a strain of black pigmented bacteria, which exhibits high abilities of distributing many spores. There were at least 14 tests that used chemical agents, including, but not limited to, sarin, VX, and tear gas. Sarin is an extremely toxic synthetic. It is colorless, odorless, and extremely potent as a nerve agent. It is lethal at even low concentrations, where death could occur a mere 10 minutes after direct inhalation, due to suffocation from respiratory paralysis. Sarin also causes those who do not receive a lethal dose to suffer permanent neurological damage. Sarin is about 26 times more deadly than cyanide. VX, standing for venomous agent X, is an extremely toxic nerve agent as well. It is an oily amber-colored non-volatile liquid. It can be dispersed through inhalation or absorption through the skin, both which would result in fatality. VX is more potent than sarin. It has been classified as a weapon of mass destruction by the United Nations and was banned by the Chemical Weapons Convention. There was a large variety of goals for the tests. Examples include selected protective devices in preventing penetration of a naval ship by a biological aerosol, the penetrability of jungle vegetation by biological agent, the penetration of an Arctic inversion by a biological aerosol cloud, the feasibility of an offshore release of Aedes aegypti mosquito as a vector for infectious diseases, the feasibility of a biological attack against an island complex, and the study of decay rates of biowarfare agents under various conditions. In May of 1965, vulnerability tests using anthrax agent Bacillus globigii were performed in Washington, D.C. by covert agents. One test was conducted at a Greyhound bus terminal, and another was conducted in the North Terminal of the National Airport. In these tests, bacteria was released from spray generators that were hidden in suitcases. SOD also conducted a series of similar tests in June 1966 by dropping light bulbs filled with Bacillus subtilis. From this test, results indicated that a citywide epidemic would have occurred. Citizens, law enforcement, and transit workers were not informed of these tests. Project 112 was conducted from 1962 to 1973. In 2005, publicly available information regarding the tests was incomplete. Edgewood Arsenal Human Experiments. From 1948 to 1975, the U.S. Army Chemical Corps conducted classified human experimentation at the Edgewood Arsenal facility in Maryland. These tests were meant to aid in the evaluation of the impact of low-dose chemical warfare agents on military personnel. It also tested protective clothing, pharmaceuticals, and vaccines. A small number of these tests were classified under the Medical Research Volunteer Program, or the MRVP. The MRVP was driven by intelligence requirements and the need for new, more effective interrogation techniques. About 7,000 soldiers and 1,000 civilians participated in these experiments, which involved exposure to over 250 different chemicals. According to the Department of Defense, the DoD, many soldiers exhibited signs of exposure to these agents, but long-term follow-up was not planned by the DoD. The experiments were abruptly ended in 1975 due to lawmakers accusing the tests and researchers of having questionable ethical practices and beliefs. Throughout the tests, compounds that were used in testing included LSD, THC, benzos, and BZ. BZ is a white crystalline powder that is odorless and non-irritating, with delayed symptoms that appear several hours after contact. Anticholinergics, toxidrome, which includes both psychological and physical effects. The most incapacitating effect being a state of delirium, characterized by cognitive dysfunction, hallucinogens, and an inability to perform basic tasks. Physical anticholinergic symptoms are also present: dilated pupils, at times to the point of blindness, an increased resting heart rate, the widening of blood vessels, dry mouth, and hyperthermia. In September of 1975, the founder and director of the program, Van Murray Sim, was called before Congress and chastised by lawmakers who questioned the follow-up care of test subjects. An Army investigation into the tests found no evidence of serious injury or death associated with the tests, but they deplored the recruiting process and the informed consent, which they suggested was coerced. And number 1, Unit 731. This next experiment is extremely heavy and upsetting. I'm providing a disclaimer for the mentions of just about everything. Unit 731 was a covert biological and chemical warfare research and development unit of the Imperial Japanese Army that engaged in lethal human experimentation during the Second Sino-Japanese War and World War II. The experiments were responsible for deaths of 200,000 to 300,000 people. Experiments included disease injection, controlled dehydration, biological weapons testing, hypobaric pressure chamber testing, organ procurement, vivisection, amputation, and standard weapon testing. Victims include kidnapped people of all ages, genders, and nationalities, and social standing. Vivisection was the process of doing surgery purely for experimental purposes. Unit 731 participated in the procurement of diseased or injured parts of the body from live, often conscious people. Researchers would remove organs of diseased victims to study the effects of the disease. Prisoners had limbs amputated in order to study the loss of mass. Limbs were removed and reattached to other sides of their bodies. Sections of organs were removed. The prisoners were victims to every strain of torment imaginable. They were SA'd by guards, starved, hung upside down, placed into low-pressure containers until their eyes popped, crushed with heavy objects, electrocuted, placed into centrifuges where they would be spun until their lives were ended, injected with animal matter, exposed to lethal doses of X-rays, injected with seawater, burned, and given drugs, all in the name of experimentation. The torment that the prisoners had to endure was inhumane and sickening. The operations and experiments continued until the end of the Second World War. All of the prisoners were killed in order to conceal the evidence. There are no documented survivors. All unit members were ordered to take their secret to the grave and were provided with cyanide vials to self-administer in the event of their capture. There is no public record of any of the loathsome unit members being caught or brought to justice. Military experiments range from surface-level unethical to repugnant and abhorrent. Thank you for joining me today, and I hope you learned something new. Leave a comment below if you have something you'd like to hear us cover.